Okay, Rabbi, so last week we spoke about the abortion shaila. We spoke about Moshe and the Tzitz Eliezer and the Tzadim Lahakal, Lahachmer, went through the sugya a little bit. And a lot of the discussion, so to speak, particularly in Rabbi Moshe's Tshuva and Cheshemish V'chelik Beis, centered on a Mishnah in Alis with a Gemara in Sanhedrin and the Feinstein Beis that explained it, and the Lashon HaRambam, and etc. And we're not going to rehash that right now, but I wanted to go into, I guess, another shaila that you could say is probably like a first cousin of this shaila, meaning it's the same building blocks that make the shaila tick, and it's another very famous case that involved Reb Moshe. Now, the story in this one is a tragic and fascinating story. The truth is that in the Asya, which is like a medical journal, they reprinted with permission the article from the Philadelphia Inquirer from October 16th, 1977, and it's a fascinating article that describes the story. And additionally, if you read the article, it's a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. You see the doctor's tremendous adoration and respect for Moshe. I want to quote a little bit of the story from the article, and then we'll move on to the shaila. Now, the story is as follows. In 1977, there was a set of twins born to a family in Lakewood. The father was learning in yeshiva, I think, at the time. A Kollel family. The twins were born in, I believe, Paul Kimball Hospital. Still had a maternity ward at that point. And these twins were born, and this was unexpected. And surprisingly, they were a set of Siamese twins. Now, Siamese twins come in various conditions. There are many different ways that a Siamese twin could present. There are Siamese twins who are connected from the head, Siamese twins who are connected from the body, Siamese twins that share organs, that don't share organs. There's a lot of particulars, and because of that, there are many, many different cases and surgeries and hospital and studies and shilas that come up with them. Now, this particular case of Siamese twins was two twin girls who were connected from their chest all the way down to the pelvic area. They shared, I believe, a liver. They shared a liver, and they also shared a heart. Now, because they shared a heart is why it was very, very difficult to discuss separation surgery for this case of Siamese twins. Now, these Siamese twins never got names, as far as I know. They were baby A and baby B, and that's how we'll refer to them. That's how they're referred to in the medical literature, and that's how they're referred to in the shaila, in the place that discuss them. So we'll refer to them as such. Now, the shaila was as follows. They were brought to the hospital. They were airlifted by helicopter to CHOP Hospital. When they brought the CHOP, the cardiologist on call, Dr. Paul Weinberger, he quickly did the EKG on them, listened to their chest with the stethoscope, and quickly discovered that they were sharing a heart. Once he discovered they were sharing a heart, they did the most sophisticated imagery that was available to them at the time, and they discovered that it was basically like a heart and a half. Baby B had a heart that had four full chambers that was pumping and doing everything that a heart is supposed to do. Baby A, who was connected to baby B, only had two chambers in her heart, and since her heart was connected to baby B's heart, it was getting blood from baby B's heart, and it was managing to circulate the blood around baby A's body, granted with the limited capacity that it had with having only two chambers in the heart, but it was basically getting oxygenated blood from baby A's heart, and then baby B's heart, and then circulating it through baby A's body. So the question was, would it be possible to separate these two babies? Now, the head of surgery at the time in CHOP Hospital was actually a doctor who became very famous. His name was Dr. C. Everett Koop, henceforth referred to as Dr. Koop because his name was a little long and unwieldy. He was an interesting-looking man. He looked like President Lincoln a little bit, like a big bushy goatee. He later on rises to some fame. Meaning he was a famous doctor at this point too. He was a very pioneering and sophisticated doctor in the field of neonatal surgeries, and pediatric surgery and etc. Meaning he was a very, very famous doctor. He accomplished a lot. He pioneered several procedures, several instruments. He was a very, very well acclaimed doctor. But he later on goes on to become the Surgeon General under Ronald Reagan in the 80s, and he headed the federal response to the HIV/AIDS crisis. So he was a little bit of like a Dr. Fauci before Dr. Fauci, meaning you're not really supposed to know who the Surgeon General is. No one really knows who the Surgeon General is. It's only in very rare occurrences that the Surgeon General gets famous, and he was a Surgeon General of such a variety. Now he's the chief head of surgery over there. Upon all the research is completed, and the doctors under Dr. Koop's leadership decide that it would be possible to stage a surgery on these two twins, baby A and baby B, but with one very, very, very tragic caveat, and that was as follows. They analyzed the wall that separates the heart of baby A and baby B, and it was micromillimeters of thickness, and they came to the accurate conclusion, that it would be impossible to separate the wall that separates these hearts. So this heart that has 6 chambers needs to stay together at all costs. It can only serve as one heart. It cannot be split into 2 hearts successfully, which means a baby without a heart can't live, which means that automatically, in order to separate these babies and allow one of them the chance to live, the other one would have to be sacrificed. Now, they did more testing, and they came to the conclusion that baby A, who was the baby that really only had a heart with 2 chambers, was unviable, could not live on its own, and was only living because it was leeching off baby B's heart. And therefore they came to the conclusion that although it would be a very tricky surgery, and it would be difficult, and would take interdisciplinary surgery with many, many doctors of different disciplines and different fields to participate in case any, complications or outcomes could arise from the surgery. And they assembled a team of 20 doctors from various hospitals, not all of them from CHOP, from various hospitals around the country, all experts in their own field. They gamed out every potential outcropping of the surgery, what could happen, any side effect, anything that could happen, and they were prepared to do a surgery. Now, the family of these tragic twins was obviously a very frum family, a very religious family from Lakewood, and they were not maskim to proceed with the surgery unless they would get the approval of a rav. Now, who's a rav that can pass in such a shaila? It's almost impossible. Obviously, it ends up on Rav Moshe's table, and the shaila comes to Rav Moshe. Now, what's interesting over here, and here's where the Kiddush Hashem part of it is that Dr. Koop himself, after compiling the team and setting up the research and doing all the imaging and the testing to establish what type of surgery would be done, Dr. Koop said that he would not proceed with such a surgery without getting Reb Moshe's haskama. He was a Protestant, I believe, a religious, he might have been Catholic, I don't remember, either a Protestant or a Catholic. He was a religious man. And he did, obviously consult with various priests and pastors that he had to do with to find out if this surgery would be permissible. And even after getting their permission, he still refused to proceed unless he got permission from Moshe Feinstein. Now, incidentally, he also got permission from the courts. They petitioned the courts to get a particular court order that allowed them to do the surgery, because they were afraid that later on some litigious member of the family would sue them and say that they committed premeditated murder. So in order to make sure that Dr. Koop and his staff would not be on the line for murder, they even got permission from the courts. Now, what's amazing is that it took Rav Moshe 11 days of deliberation to come to a conclusion. Now, there is no tshuva in Igros Moshe, as far as I know, about this Indian. The tshuva that was published about it was from Rabbi Dr. Moshe Tendler, Rav Moshe's son-in-law, who published it in a book that he published called Care of the Critically Ill. He published what he called an unpublished tshuva from Rav Moshe, where he writes about the story, about the deliberations, how seriously Rav Moshe took it, the sleepless nights. He says that Rav Moshe moved into his apartment, the Tendler family apartment, for the duration of the deliberation, and every night around the kitchen table, when Rav Moshe was done his day's work of saying shir and answering Klal Yisrael shaylos, they would sit around the table, Rav Moshe with his family, with his son-in-law, and his Einiklach, and possibly his sons, and other Talmidei Chachamim, who were invited to participate in the deliberations, and they would bat back and forth the various svaras that were relevant until Rav Moshe finally came to the conclusion. Now, what's interesting is that in this article, in the Philadelphia Inquirer, there's a quote as follows: during the 11 days that it took Rav Moshe to come to this conclusion, several of the doctors who were brought in, outside specialists who were brought in to participate on the team, who didn't live in Philadelphia and were sleeping in the hospital or in local hotels all along all this time waiting for Moshe's psak, became frustrated, and at a meeting, at a team meeting with Dr. Koop, they said, "No, Dr. Koop, you already got permission from the priest, the pastor. We went through we dotted our I's, we crossed our T's, we know the nuts and bolts of the surgery cold. We believe we could do it. What are we waiting for?" And this is what he said. He stood up. He was an imposing man, a serious, imposing man. He said as follows. He says, "The ethics and the morals involved in this decision are too complex for me." And he looks around the room and he says, "And I believe that they are too complex for you as well," meaning everyone at this table. "Therefore," he says, "I referred it to an old rabbi in the Lower East Side of New York. He's a great scholar, a saintly individual. He knows how to answer such questions, and when he tells me, I too will know. Now that's like an incredible thing for a doctor, a non-Jewish doctor in the 70s, to say about Rav Moshe, like to realize and recognize Rav Moshe's tremendous, samchus and tzidkus and Yerushalayim, and be so taken by it that he would, silence a table of dissenting doctors with such a quote. To me, that's like a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. And Rabbi Tendler, in his article, in his Sefer, also writes that although the story was a tragic story and it didn't have a happy ending, it was a tremendous Kiddush Hashem, the Kayach of Rav Moshe and the Psak and the Derech Eretz that he was given. Now, I'll say the ending of the story and then we'll go into the Shaila. So the ending of the story is that ultimately Rav Moshe, after a few days of deliberation, Rav Moshe had Rabbi Tendler call the doctor more than once to ask a few different pratim of the surgery, and we'll go into them in some detail. Rav Moshe passed and the surgery was allowed, and the surgery was done a few days later. Obviously, baby A, who did not have a viable heart and would not be able to live, died on the operating table and was buried shortly after. And baby B survived the surgery and was doing amazingly well, was thriving, but sadly, a few weeks later, was given a blood transfusion that was tainted with hepatitis B and passed away shortly after. So ultimately it has a tragic ending, and both of the twins don't make it to survival. But the surgery was done, and it was a revolutionary surgery, and Chap Hospital, under the auspices of Dr. Koop, had a press conference shortly after to announce the revolutionary procedure that was done, and that's why there's articles in the newspapers of the day writing about it. And it was an amazing success on its own merit, the surgery, although it didn't lead to a happy ending. So now, what's the Shaila? What does this hinge upon? So now what's really interesting, what's unique about this is that although Siamese twins is like something still the medical world still today is learning pratim about, and exactly how and what and when and are they all the details, it seems that there are really two Gemaras in Shas that are discussing some sort of similar phenomenon to a Siamese twin. And I'll start with this one. The Gemara Menachas in the Flamed Zayin and Aleph brings a very interesting shaila. The Gemara says, "Bayi minei plima mi Rebbe." Now, plima is a Tana who asks Rebbe a shaila as follows. And he says as follows: Misha yesh le shnei rashim. Somebody has two heads. Be'ezim mehen meniach tefillin. Which one of the two heads should he put tefillin on? Now, you find this in the Gemara sometimes that if the Rav Hanishal who's being asked the question feels like the question is like a nudniki question, he gets upset. The Gemara famously says, "Al da'af kula Rav Yirmiyah b'Samedrash," when Rav Yirmiyah was asking too many nitty gritty details. So Rebbe has this reaction over here, and Rebbe says, at least the Pashas reading of the Gemara, Rebbe says, "Amalei," he says, "Oy kum gali, oy kabel olach shamta." He says, "What are you asking me this crazy question about something that doesn't exist? Either show me such a child, or be makabel shamta on yourself." Ad the hachi v'hachi, the Gemara says, in the interim, hu gaver, also hu gaver, this man came. Amalei, he said, "Es yaldli yenuka disle trei Rashi." A baby was born to me that has two heads. Kam bein l'meisav l'kayin. What should I do for pidin haben? So also Usaba, and they made a limud, and they said you have to give 10 slum. To which the Gemara says, L'maisa, it's maybe not such a good susal, kashani hacha de begulgoylas tali rachmana. That it could be that it's tali in heads over there, regarding pidin haben, but regarding tefillin, maybe it's not connected. Now the shaila is if these babies would be treifus, okay, leaving that aside. Now, Tosfos Afanor the Menachos and the Flamed Zayin says as follows: Oy kum gali, zok Tosfos, ba'olam hazel leka. In our world, there isn't such a thing as a human that has two heads. Aval yesh b'medrash, there is a medrash. Ashmedai hoitzi mitachas karka. Ashmedai, the demon king who the Gemara in Gittin discusses, took such a being out from his storehouses underground. Sheyesh le shnei rashim lefnei Shleim HaMelech. He presented it to Shleim HaMelech, and here's the kicker: v'nasa isha v'ahilid banim. This person got married and had children. Who were like him, b'shnei rashim, and some like his wife, b'reish echad, who only had one head. When it came time to separate the Yerusha, the children who had two heads came and said they deserved to get two pieces of the Yerusha, and they asked in front of Shleima. Now, in the Shita Mekabetzes on the side over here, the Shita brings something interesting. He says, Nusach acher, Shleima b'chachmasai. How did Shleima resolve this? Shleima, with his great wisdom, Hirsiach mayim, he boiled water. The kisa echad ben arashim, he covered over one of the heads, he put a hood on one of the heads. V'shafach haroischem al reish hasheni, and he poured the hot water on the second child's head. And machmas tsar haroischem tzaak b'shtei rashim, and because of the tsar of the hot water that was poured on, the children screamed out with two heads. Amar Shleima shma mina, the child told the achas hashnei arashim ve'ein nidan elikesh echad. This is one creature with two heads, and they only have the din of one person, they only get one Yerusha. So here you have Shlema being Machriya, so to speak, that this presentation, the Gemara Menachos, the Shaila of Mishesh Shnei Rashim, is really one person with two heads. Now, it's very hard to know what case the Gemara is talking about over here, and the Achronim that discuss this Gemara bring this down. It's hard to know if this is just some sort of anomaly, some sort of strange creature like the Gemara in Menachos and other places brings. B'chayris, Menachos brings cases of creatures that are just, anomalous and strange and that don't exist the way we see it by normal creatures, and maybe they're not even viable and they can't really live and etc. Or is this actually a case of Siamese twins? Of two conjoined twins who had two heads. They were conjoined fully through their body and had two heads. Now, what makes our Shaila not exactly like this Shaila, and what makes most modern Siamese twins not like the Shaila, is that most Siamese twins have, on some level or another, their own respiratory system, their own circulatory system. They're clearly two unique individuals, two unique people. One of them sometimes is less developed than the other. Sometimes they share organs, and there's various different amounts of organs that they could share, internal organs in the chest cavity. But they on some level have their own respiratory and circulatory system, which makes them two unique children, two unique beings, not like the Shita Mekvetzes is coming out of here. And Rav Moshe, when he sent Rabbi Tendler to discuss this with Dr. Koop, this was the first question that he wanted to know, was do they have individual respiratory and circulatory systems? Meaning, are they their own people, or are they just one human with additional Ivarim, with additional limbs and organs that are attached to them, and really you could just cut them off and it's not a Shaila at all? And when Dr. Koop told them that they have their own respiratory and circulatory system, so Moshe came to the obvious conclusion that obviously they're considered two humans, they're two different people, and now it becomes a tremendous Shaila Chamura. Are you allowed to kill one of them to save the other? Are you allowed to sacrifice baby A to save baby B? Now, putting that Gemara aside, there's another Gemara, an interesting Gemara, and this one's maybe more of an Agadah Gemara, but the Gemara in Eivin and Dafid Ches says, when the Gemara is bringing a list of things that are dual, the Gemara says, Amr of Yirmi Bar Elazar, do parts of Panim Hoyle Adam Rishon, Shenemar Achav Akedem Tzartani. And the Gemara continues, it goes on, the details, etc. And the Gemara in Ksubas makes reference of this, but the Gemara seems to be saying that there exists such a thing as Adam Rishon, it seems, was born kind of as a quasi-set of Siamese twins, meaning he was born as Adam and Chava connected to each other, either back to back or side by side, or maybe just a tail, whatever the version of it is. But the Gemara seems to be describing some sort of case of a Siamese twin. Now, maybe it's an Agadah Gemara, and there's not a lot to extract from Halacha. The Gemara is not really talking about Halacha, they can have communities over there. So putting it aside, just showing it as another occurrence in the Gemara, where the Gemara seems to be describing a case of Siamese twins. Now, there are various poskim throughout the Deiros who either encountered or heard about Siamese twins and discussed them on some level or another. And I want to just start with the Halachically, because he's the one of the oldest ones to talk about it, and he's also clearly talking about a case of very little viability to one of the twins. He writes as follows, it's in Halachically and Chelik Aleph and Siman Reish Mem Hey. He says as follows, Zechreini shari'isi b'Medinas Italia. I remember that I saw in Italy, Goy Echad keben chaf hei shanim. Now that means the kid lived a long time. Shenolad davak im tu'umay adat tibur, who was born connected with his twin until his stomach. Chazeh keneged chazeh v'sham nidvaku. Chest to chest, and that's where they were connected. And this person that I saw was walking around and complete like any other person. And the little one, meaning the dead weight, the twin that wasn't viable, had a little head that was hanging to the side, and his legs were hanging down, and they reached until the knees of the gadol. And there was no feeling in that second child. It was just like a limb that was totally paralyzed and that had no nerve movement. And I have all sorts of questions about this baby. It's keeping it alive. He says the second baby, the non-viable one, the one that's just like hanging off the first one, obviously is being fed by the internal organs of the baby that is viable. And this shows a very deep level of medical knowledge, medical understanding. It says, and he continues on, so, and then he says, in regards to making a bracha, on the senior twin, the twin that's viable and alive and walking around, him you don't make a bracha on him because he's a regular baby. The other one must be a geisis. Maybe you can't make a bracha, make a dayan emes. But if you made it a geisis, maybe you yitzis. So now this halachically is giving us a very interesting case of a case of Siamese twins that seem to have survived well into adulthood. They seem to have survived a long time, even though one of them was much more viable than the other. And seemingly baby 2 was just leeching off baby 1, but they seem to survive. And clearly in this case, although the baby's a geisis, you're not allowed to kill a geisis, you're not allowed to kill a nephil. An adult baby who's going to die, an adult creature that's going to die, and therefore, of course, you wouldn't be able to sacrifice baby B in this case. They're both alive and viable and doing it, but it's just an interesting case. Now, Rav Moshe, based on what we're taking out of this tshuva, had another question for Dr. Koop. He wanted to know, is it possible for both of them to live or not? Is it impossible for baby A and baby B to survive, or is it possible that both of them could survive, like the halachically? Now, Dr. Koop, based on the imaging and the testing that was done, told Rav Moshe, the way it is, the way we see it, the doctors see it, either we could watch both of them die slowly, or we could watch one of them die quickly and give the other one a chance at survival. That's what Dr. Koop told Rabbi Tendler to tell Rav Moshe. Now, so this rules out the tzad that they're both fully viable and opens up a new perspective that perhaps one of these babies is not even really considered a full nefesh. And we'll see how that's going to play a role in Rav Moshe's psak. Now, there is one more, you say this to a building block, call it a tshuva, that's a building block in this discussion, is a tshuva from the Shvus Yaakov. Now, the Shvus Yaakov is more, call it academic. He writes, he says, Re'isi davar chadash b'chanukah b'taf samachas huva me'eretz le'ez shnei na'arim goyim tumim zacharim shedvukim zeh v'zeh kad kad rasheim. Now, this is a slightly different case of Siamese twins, and I think that the surgeries that were pioneered to separate Siamese twins who were connected by the head is much more modern medicine, maybe, even close to our days. Extremely, extremely complex surgeries. But he says that they saw a case of Siamese twins who were connected from the head, and both of them were yonik, va'eichel, v'shaisim, v'daber, v'chushu, v'neatzim. Each one had emotions, feelings, nerve endings. They ate, they drank, they did everything on their own, and they were like 2 years old when he saw them. He says, "Gam be'enai re'isiv." I saw him ubirachti aleim kedinai. Then va'amad hashoyel v'shoyel lefarish leidinim im yeira ken chas v'shalom b'Yisrael. He says the shoyel is asking what would be with such a circumstance by Jewish children. What would be their halachas regarding pedina ben, regarding chalitza, regarding puru, regarding many of the different shoyels that could crop up with Jewish children. And stam, it's interesting. You see the Shvus Yaakov's personality over here. He says, "Sha'alta shoyel stam keshelis atam." It's a tipshistic question to just like open-endedly ask me what would be the dinim of these people. It's a very temish way of asking, but afal pika and I'll answer you. And he goes through the Gemara Menachos, the sugya that we brought down, and the Gemara in Eruvin. He brings these various chazals that are relevant. And what's interesting, rather, the takeaway of this tshuva, and this became something that was a little bit of a point of contention later on, is that the Shvus Yaakov does say that these children would never be able to get married. Asali Nasa, he says, Kivin the Asal Shamish B'fnei Kol Chai. That's what the Shvus Yaakov's conclusion is. And the Yosef Shalom Natans in the Shalom Meshiv, in Haskama, on a reprint of the Shvus Yaakov later on, years later, he writes about this tshuva, and the Beis Yitzchak Shmelkish writes about it. And there's some pushback. I saw like a 20, 30 page tshuva from someone, very strenuously and probably accurately arguing in the Shvus Yaakov and saying that they would be able to get married, and he spoke to different rabbanim and etc. So should the shaila present itself, and that would be an interesting outcropping of it. Now, in any case, these are the building blocks that are necessary to discuss the shaila. Now, this is the shaila that presents itself to Rav Moshe, where these are two babies that cannot live as is. They share vital organs like the heart, and now becomes this terrible, terrible dilemma, this shaila chamura, about separating them and sacrificing baby A so that baby B could live. Now, there is one more particular question that Rav Moshe had that he felt was very important to be machriya the shaila, that he asked Rabbi Tendler to ask Dr. Koop, and that's as follows. And that's he asked Rabbi Tendler to ask him as follows. This 6-chambered heart that the doctors are convinced has walls too narrow to split up and cannot be carved out into 2 hearts for 2 babies, so it needs to be used as 1 heart for 1 baby. Is it interchangeable? That was his question. Could either baby A or baby B use this heart and live a viable life? Or is it only possible for this heart to go to one of the 2 babies and the other one is impossible for it to live? Now, Dr. Koop, based on the imaging, told Rabbi Tendler to tell Rav Moshe as follows. He said that this heart, 4 of the chambers are solidly baby B's heart. Baby B could clearly live with this heart a good and happy life. The other 2 chambers are because there's a hole, there's 2 leaks in baby B's heart, that allows blood to leak into baby A's heart. So baby A is artificially being kept alive from baby B's heart. But baby A does not even have a working heart of its own, and they could never put this heart into baby A's chest cavity. It could only stay by baby B. So what Dr. Cooper is telling Moshe is that only baby B is a viable live child that could live with his heart. Baby A, he said, is essentially not living on its own. It's like living on a heart-lung machine. I don't know if that existed in those days, but it's like it's living on it did probably. It's like living on an artificial heart, a machine, a mechanized heart that's keeping it alive. It has no heart of its own. It's only living off baby B's heart. Now, based on all this information that was presented to Rav Moshe, and after all the deliberations for days and days, with the tremendous chaymer that such a child deserves, Moshe came to the conclusion that it was permitted to do the surgery. Now, the rationale was never explained, and there was definitely some over the years in various different medical journals, halachic or medical journals, where people published articles with bikairis on this psak and not agreeing with it. And there's even a rumor, I don't know if it's true, that Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky did not approve of the psak. But Rav Moshe's psak was later explained by his son-in-law, Rav Moshe Tendler, from an unpublished tshuva, where he translated Rav Moshe's tshuva into English, and he explained Rav Moshe's rationale as follows. Now, there was two, call it finalists in the discussion that were relevant to the psak. One of them, I'll leave aside. We'll see if we have time to get to it. Let's first talk about the one that Rav Moshe was actually saimach on to allow the psak. So let's just recap what we spoke about last week, the Mishnah and Aulus quickly, in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, and then we'll recap it quickly. The Mishnah and Aulus in Perek Zayin says as follows: at the end of Perek Zayin, it says, a woman who's struggling to give birth, she's deep in labor, and she's in danger now. She's hemorrhaging, let's say, she's in great danger if this labor continues. So the din is, says the Mishnah, we're allowed to surgically extract the child from her stomach, meaning chop it up, the child will be killed. We sacrifice this baby, this potential baby for the mother, because her life goes first. If most of the baby comes out, then we don't touch him. Even though now we're in a life and death tug of war, the mother and the baby are both fighting for survival, and we're going to see who's going to survive this birth. We don't touch it, we leave it as it is. It's not our decision to make. Now, the Gemara in Sanhedrin and the Feinstein and Beis explains this. Amar Rav Huna says as follows: Katan aroidif nitin latzil benafshay. A katan who's being aroidif, you're allowed to save the person who's being nirdaf, i.e. the mother in this case, by taking the katan's life. But yatsa roishay ein noigim by lefishay doich nefesh pnei nefesh. V'amai roidif who. To which the Gemara asks, how do you make sense of this Mishnah? If you tell me that you're allowed to kill the child who's being raised with the mother, so who cares if the baby crowned and the head is showing? The baby's damaging the mother's chance of survival. You should be able to kill the baby because the baby's a raidif. So the Gemara says, no, Rav Huna answered, Shani Hasam, the Mishamaya Karadfule. This is heavenly ordained. This is not something that anybody chose. This we look at as a situation that developed. Hashem placed them in the situation where it's a life and death tug of war. They're both looked at as equal contenders for life or being rid of each other. And we spoke that the Rambam in Perek Aleph of V'chaz Ritzeach, Paskins and Halacha Tes, that because this is Tivei Shalom. You can't be Doich HaNefesh B'Nefesh because this is Tivei Shalom. This is how it normally is. Now, meaning that when the baby is already almost born, the baby has a schoskim, it's considered a nefesh, and then it becomes a life and death tug of war between the mother and the baby. So said Rav Moshe as follows. Rav Moshe suggested a chiddush. He said, this baby A, who does not have a heart and does not have a way to live, and is just living off the scraps of baby B, should be looked at as like a baby that's still in utero, as like a baby that's still b'toichi burei. Why? Just like a baby b'toichi burei has no egenus choskim, it has no independent way to live. It just lives off the nutrients and the cocoon that the mother's womb provides it. And therefore, when it becomes a tug of war between the mother and the baby, the halacha is chayei koidmin. Her nefesh is more substantial, and it's considered like the baby's a roidif, and you're allowed to sacrifice the baby for the mother's life. So too in this circumstance, said Rav Moshe, baby A, that has no viability on its own, and there is no way for it to ever live, like the doctor is saying, and the heart could never be transferred there. And even as it is right now, its heart is not viable enough to keep it alive, and it's only being kept alive through the largesse of baby B. It's not considered an equal nefesh with baby B, and therefore when it becomes a life and death competition where baby B and baby A are being rid of each other, so to speak, baby B's life is worth more, it's more substantial, and therefore you're able to sacrifice baby A, so that baby B could live. This was Rav Moshe's chiddush. Now this is you need Rav Moshe's places to make this, to take this svara and say that a fully live baby that's born, that's heart is beating, that's breathing, that's blood is circulating, that's even eating and going to the bathroom, that the nurses are describing its own personality, etc., could still be looked at as a knappe nefesh, as not a fully developed nefesh, and could be sacrificed for baby B's survival. Now, there was people who had kashas on this, and even Rabbi Tendler in his Tshuva discusses the exact dik and Lashon HaRambam, Shariz Tiva Shalaylam, and how that would apply by Siamese twins. And I think in the Mishnas Pikuach Nefesh, he brings Barichos, various discussions, and Nishmas Avram, and in Dr. Steinberg in Asya, he wrote an article about it. And I think even Roberto Pravarsky in Bad Kodesh, and Chelik Dalet, and Chelik Hey, he wrote different Chuvas, writing Lamdish Chuvas, very Geshmak Chuvas, and Chelik, if someone wants to look it up, and Chelik Dalet, Simon and Beis, and Chelik Hey, Simon and Samach Beis, different Chuvas to discuss Reb Moshe's psak. Now, at the time he's writing it, it wasn't exactly known what Reb Moshe's particular rationale was, but he more or less guesses what it should be with his kashas and etc. And it makes for some interesting reading. Now, Reb Moshe was seimach on this all the way l'maisa, and Dr. Koop successfully conducted the surgery based on his tremendous veneration for Reb Moshe. They were seimach on Reb Moshe's psak, and sadly, the tragic end is the tragic end. Now, there is a second like Hilu finalist that was discussed, which as a rationale for the Tzadim L'Hakal over here, and that relies on the sugya in Sanhedrin, in the Gemara, in the Yerushalmi, and Trumas, with Sheva ben Bichri. But I think we'll leave that for a different day, Mitzvah Hashem, because we'll leave that to be continued.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.